Hi ho, it's off to another podcast we go. Welcome, friends. This is Syracuse Sports. I'm your host. My name's Brent. 2023. It was just last year. Seems like a lot further than that, though. But that is where we have arrived in our series, which will conclude, by the way. We did 2020, 2021, 2022, and here we are, the class of 2023, both recruiting and in the transfer portals. We've been sort of regrading and reevaluating. You're going to hear in a minute. Emily and I did this one a little bit differently since there's so many fresh faces that are still trying to find their way at Syracuse football. Frankly, a lot of faces that aren't here anymore, how prevalent the transfer portal has become by this point. So what we've done to this point is we did overvalued, undervalued, and maybe met expectations. Little bit different how we do it to round out our reevaluation of the Syracuse football, both recruiting classes and transfer classes of the last few years. So we're looking forward to that. But if you missed any of the other reevaluations, 2020, 2021, 2022, they're all up if you subscribe on Spotify, on Apple, of course, Syracuse Orange Sports, on YouTube. They're all there ready for you to listen and watch on demand when you want. If you haven't gotten to those previous classes yet, we would encourage you to do so and build up to 2023, the last in our list of reevaluations. But summer's here and the time is right for dancing in the street. It's also going to be a lot of fun doing this here podcast. And thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders, we've got some fun things planned for you, some drafts, some lists, some fun topics that we're going to dive into throughout the summer here on Syracuse Sports. If you have not become a Syracuse Sports Insider yet, give it a shot. Text the word orange to 315-847-3895. You can try it free for 2 weeks. And what you're doing is you're texting me directly. It's not a group text. You're not getting 100 texts from all the different insiders, though you probably should, because the insight and the opinions and some of the things that our Syracuse Sports Insiders tell me, you guys want to see a lot of these texts, trust me. But what it is you text me, I text you. If I have breaking news, you're going to get it first as a Syracuse Sports Insider. So the other day, Derek Coleman had some things to say about the number 44 and Eddie Lampkin taking over the number 44 for Syracuse basketball. I sent that to our Syracuse Sports Insiders. It sparked a heck of a discussion there, and that's what we do. Sometimes we just talk sports. I'll send you guys some opinions. You'll send me opinions, and hey, that's what I'm here for, man. But being a Syracuse Sports Insider is amazing for that. It's amazing the feedback that we get from you guys, the ideas that you have for this podcast, and of course, your opinions that get featured on this podcast as well. So why not give it a shot if you haven't already? Just text the word orange to 315-847-3895. 2 weeks free, just $3.99 a month after that. Let's get to it, shall we? Emily and I shine the spotlight on 2023. Okay, Emily, we have arrived at the last of our reevaluations of recent Syracuse football recruiting / transfer classes. And these last two, including this one, we're going to find that transfers have a big impact here. And I thought we would mix things up a little bit for this last one, considering so many of these guys are still young. They're still trying to find their way. Obviously, this is just last year's class here. Instead of overvalued, undervalued, or met expectations, what we're going to do for 2023 is do stock up, stock down, or hold. Maybe we don't know quite enough, so hold on that stock a little bit with these guys. And like 2022, Emily, we start the 2023 list. And again, guys, we're using the 247 Sports composite rankings from 2023 if you want to follow along here. The top rated player on the list no longer on the roster, and that's running back Ike Daniels, who Syracuse got as a 3-star prospect from Stafford, Virginia.
Yeah, Ike was highly rated coming in, obviously, as we just said. And he did get some playing time last year. He did appear in 4 games as a reserve running back. Had I think over 100 yards across those 4 games. Pulling it up. Yeah, it's 4 games, 18 carries, 103 yards. So he was one of those guys that was seeing the field early in those season games where by the 4th quarter, none of the starters are playing, and seemed poised like he could be someone who would be on the depth chart and maybe challenge Price then the next season, before obviously Price left as well. But not here. I think if he had been here, I would probably say stock up a little bit. But he's not. So stock down.
LaQuinn Allen, Yassine Willis are the clear 1-2 at that running back position.
Right.
You do need depth at that position. I don't blame him if you wanted to transfer elsewhere, if you wanted to play, but you still do need a little depth at that position, and be interesting to see, knock on wood, hopefully one of those two guys don't get hurt. But you mentioned you had Price, Daniels in the bullpen, if you will, at backup, but now Syracuse has to kind of reaffirm that running back room. We're at the second player on the list, and that is a New York State prospect. He was number 2 in the state of New York, and that is Rashard Perry, who has made an impact already, has played 10 games at Syracuse, and has worked his way into the rotation at defensive line. 3-star prospect right off the top of the list here. I'd say stock up. This is a guy that is making the transition in the Fran Brown era here from the Dino Babers era, and as a young player looks to make immediate contributions and will continue to do so.
Yeah, I definitely think Rashard's a stock up guy. I do think there's a strong chance we see him on the depth chart at the defensive line this year. But interestingly, a couple episodes ago, we talked about in that 2022 season, SU tried to use Wes Ho in the Chris Elmore role, the fullback spot, and that didn't really pan out. Well, Rashard Perry was kind of the guy who got to take a stab at that last season, and they did use him a little bit more often. So he was kind of like a multi-tool guy there. I don't necessarily think that'll be the same in this new era that we're entering, but certainly he is a guy who I think has already proven his worth in just one season and will continue to do so for the next few years if he sticks around.
Back to the running back position, Emily, and Muafak Parkman, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, by the way. I only heard his name mentioned a couple of times in the past, but he was not rostered in the spring, and that eventually went into the transfer portal. So another running back that moved on for Syracuse, which brings us to Jean-Ray Reed, who tell you what, stock up on this guy. Comes in as an inside offensive lineman, 6'3", 320, and firmly on the field for the Orange going forward in the Fran Brown era.
Yeah, I mean, he came in and won that starting role right away. I think was really consistent in that starting role last year. I think there might have been like one bad snap, one or two, but like a negligible amount because I don't really remember it at all. So huge addition there at that position. Obviously in 2022 they'd had Josh Iloa as the main guy snapping the ball. And so they needed someone a little bit more consistent. I think that's right? It was Josh Iloa snapping.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So his addition, I mean, he's definitely going to have that role again, especially since the other guy they had seemed to be testing at in this role was Joe Moore in the spring, and he's since left the program. So I think Jean-Ray Reed, the general, big general, as he likes to be called, is right. Firmly in that center position and definitely a stock up guy.
Couple more offensive linemen here. Jaeden Bass from Springfield, Massachusetts, who is currently at 6'6", 309, 3-star prospect. I think I'm going to hold on this one, Emily. We just haven't seen enough of him at this point to really make a determination on that. There's a lot of competition at that offensive line, so we'll see if he can get his way in there. The next name has, and that's Lysander Malello, comes in from Texas, 6'5", 330, 3-star prospect. Now, he didn't play last year, but has seemingly worked his way in the spring into the 2 deep here and is going to be pushing for time going forward.
Right. He's a JUCO guy, just like Jean-Ray Reed was. I think I'm not 100% sure this was an academic issue that kind of held him out this past year. I don't believe it was an injury. So yeah, interested to see, as we talked about in the 2022 episode, he's an offensive tackle. And so that's a spot that they're looking to slot people in, but there is a couple guys who could go for that. And so looking forward to seeing him on the field, hopefully for the first time this fall, but he's kind of in a hold position right now. We don't really know much about him.
I would put a hold on this next guy, too, and it's a prospect I'm intrigued by, and that's David Clement, who came in from a Christian Brothers Academy from Albany, 6'7", 265. He did get on the field last year on special teams, which is that ticket to get on the field for a lot of those younger guys trying to find their way. Played in 11 games. He has been worked in as an additional blocker at times as well, but when you have a Dan Villari and a Rondé Gadsden ahead of you, it's going to be tough to implement them into the passing game here. We brought up in the 2022 podcast. We'll see what throwing to the tight end means in this new offense under Jeff Nixon, but I'm going to put a hold on Clement. I'm tempted to go stock up, though, because I think when he finally gets his chance, he's going to make an impact here. He's just got two very talented players ahead of him.
Right. And potentially both of those guys leave after this season, right? I would say OG almost 100% leaves after this season. Dan maybe sticks around another year. I don't know exactly what his plan would be there. Maybe wants another year at tight end so he can solidify that about himself as one of those for potential draft consideration. But yeah, I would agree. He's a hold right now, but he's one of those guys that I am looking forward to following over the next few years. He was coming in to Syracuse off an injury, a pretty serious injury, his senior year of high school that had caused him to miss that season. So there was a little bit of that in the spring of 2023 when he was an early enrollee. But yeah, certainly curious. I think we'll see him again, probably in like a little bit of a blocking role, but nothing much beyond that until maybe next year and the year after.
David Omaporolia is next. He's an edge out of Gwynn Oak, Maryland, 6'3", 240. Emily, what would you say on him? I'd probably go a hold as well, just because I don't think we have enough data to make a determination here on stock up, stock down. But what do you think?
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's depth at the defensive line position, which you can always use, especially at Syracuse, and especially now that they're switching to that 4 down front. But yeah, just not enough data on him. Yeah, he's a hold.
Bryce Cahoon was a wide receiver, 6'2", 175, and I say was because Bryce, among many players that transferred out in this season, he did play 3 games last year, but did enter the transfer portal. So that brings us to another transfer in Ty Gordon, a defensive lineman out of Haymarket, Virginia. So stock down on him. And then to Jaleel Smith. There's a trend developing here a little bit, Emily. Another player. He was from Brooklyn, Abraham Lincoln High School, an edge at 6'5", 230, 3-star prospect, who also transferred out of Syracuse. So 3 names in a row there that moved on.
Yeah, he transferred and then withdrew, but I don't believe was re-rostered. That was a little bit of a confusing situation. And then maybe re-entered again. There was a little bit of confusion this spring. He's not on the roster, but I think he maybe left and then tried to come back and then left again is how that worked out. So that's an interesting case, but yeah.
Hard to keep track.
Hold.
Hard to keep track of some of these
right.
guys, right? That brings us to Zion Moultrie Goddard from Iona Preparatory School in New Rochelle. He's a linebacker prospect who did preserve his red shirt. He did play in 5 games. That includes the bowl game, though, so that preserves his red shirt. That linebacker position, there's some depth there. Is he going to have the opportunity to push ahead? I'm going to put a hold on him because I'm just not quite sure if he's somebody that's going to be on the field next year, especially with names like Marlo Wax and Derek McDonald and some other names in a 4-2-5 defense. Might be a little harder for him to get on the field that way. We'll see if special teams is a ticket for him, but I'm going to put a hold on him at this point.
Yeah, I would say he's a hold in a similar way that David Clement is. I think over the next few years, he has potential to be a stock up guy. Not that like we've seen a lot of that on the field, obviously, yet, but the way he's talked about by some of the other guys and posted about and like just seems to be really in with the linebacker room, which like obviously position groups are always tight, but like I see Marlo post about him and with him often, and like that seems like a sign that he's like a guy that we're gonna want to watch over the next few years.
Somebody to watch, exactly. So Marlo's buying; he's got stock up on him, but
right.
I'm not quite putting my money on him at this point. But that's encouraging that if Marlo Wax thinks that highly of him. On the offensive line, you got Travion Mack next up here, who came to Syracuse out of St. Paul, Minnesota, as a 3-star prospect. Did play in 2 games last season, but I would put him in the hold category as well. He hasn't quite cracked the 2 deep.
Yeah, definitely a hold. He's just, again, like so many of these guys, right? We just haven't even seen play football yet, which is kind of crazy to think about, but we'll see this fall.
If your name is not LaQuinn Allen or Yassine Willis. You're a running back that is transferred out of Syracuse. Destin Hawkins did just that. He ends up at Nevada, came to Syracuse from California, so at least he'll be a little closer to home. Josiah Jeffrey comes up next on the list here, Emily, and Jeffrey was a linebacker prospect that entered the transfer portal as well. Now, here's one of the more intriguing guys on the list. Darrell Gill Jr., unrated prospect, unrated at wide receiver. 13 games, weapon on kick returns, and somebody that can get down the field, is well in the mix at that wide receiver position on the 2 deep, and somebody that really fell through the cracks because he's a weapon, and he's somebody that I think they're going to utilize going forward here, and somebody that pops on the field.
Yeah, I mean, stock massively up with Darrell Gill Jr. Just he's not in that top 5 of guys in these past 4 classes that were the most undervalued or anything like that, but he's top 10 because, I mean, he got playing time. He was on the depth chart last year. Now, part of that was because Trevor Pena was out, right? And we've seen Gill play a lot of that slot receiver position where Pena usually is. He also returned kicks and punts last year and factored in on special teams, but certainly we saw a lot of him this spring. And I think we will continue to see a lot of him, even in what has become a more packed wide receiving room.
Jacoby Seaburn, next on the list here, a cornerback who ended up in the transfer portal, came to Syracuse via Santa Barbara City College in Santa Barbara, California. Staying in the secondary, Barry Buxton, also from Santa Barbara City College, 6'1", 180, unrated guy. Did play in 9 games, mostly on special teams last year. Probably somebody we'd put a hold on at this point just to see if he can work his way into the mix a little bit more.
Right. Yeah. And as a JUCO guy, he obviously has a little bit more limited time to do that. But we'll see if maybe he works his way in anywhere besides special teams this year.
So much like the 2022 class, as we cross the bridge into the transfers, this is where we're going to start to see a little bit more of an impact here. Short of Khalib Gilmore, who came in as a linebacker but has transferred out and is now at Ball State. But now you start talking about some guys that got on the field and have made an impact once we get beyond Miles Farmer, who came to Syracuse from Nebraska, but he transferred out and is at Appalachian State. David Woolabaugh, I want to say stock up. He started a couple games last year, was looking good at right tackle, has the lineage, of course. His father played here at Syracuse. But the injury situation is tricky, Emily. Not only the injury that he suffered, remember, he had to have an additional surgery in the spring. He had a little bit of a setback, and everything we heard, we got an opportunity to talk to him in the spring. He says everything is on track, but what we saw with Woolabaugh throughout spring was his foot in a cast, and he had one of those little scooters he was riding around on. So I don't know. I think if he's healthy, he can get back in the mix. But we've brought up some transfers and some other names that have been brought in at that offensive line position. So I'm going to put a hold on Woolabaugh. I've seen what he can do, but he's going to have a heck of a road to get back here once he gets healthy and if he can really get in the mix and compete again.
David's definitely an interesting case because he started at that right tackle position. The tackle positions, I think, are going to be some of the most interesting to shake out this fall. I mean, the whole offensive line is, right? We keep on saying this, but like there are several like tackles that I think could get that second tackle spot. I want to say it's probably pretty likely it's going to be him, and that like Joe Cruz would be his backup. And you got Savion Washington probably on the left side. But I want to watch the offensive line again in fall camp before I commit to that, just because there have been new faces. And even though some of the guys that have come in are like labeled as guards or interior offensive linemen, like David was when he came in, offensive linemen get moved around all the time. And so like Demetrius Weatherspoon, who's coming in as an interior offensive lineman, like he might move from guard to tackle, and David might get moved from tackle to guard. And so I think he's definitely in the mix. And because he's in the mix, even despite missing like everything since week 2 of last year, like I kind of want to say stock up. Like he proved himself really quickly, and that was especially like he only did 1 year at Kentucky and didn't play. So he's like pretty fresh faced in college football still, and made that impression early on and has made it off the field enough to maybe still be in the mix. But I think your hold is fair too.
I think the interesting thing, though, is he is going to be competing with a couple other guys that were not a part of spring ball, right? You think he lost all of spring, that's going to put him behind, but a couple names that we've mentioned are going to be in competition and we're not in spring ball either. So at least that gives Wallabah a little bit of an edge, if you will, because he was on the field last year. That brings us to Jaleel Martin, safety, who came to Syracuse via Nebraska. Got on the field for 9 games last year, mostly in special teams and as a reserve. And as we've talked about, Emily, as we've built up the years here, that secondary room is getting more and more crowded at this point. So, and Fran Brown brings that expertise. I'm going to put a hold on him just to see what the fresh perspective of Fran Brown and this defensive coaching staff is and whether they feel he cracks that rotation. But playing on special teams as much as he has is going to give him at least a little bit of a heads up.
Right. Again, like, I think when he was brought in, like, he was a good addition because they didn't have a ton of secondary depth last season. Like, luckily they did not need to have a ton, but that was like definitely a storyline we kind of watched with a wary eye last fall. Like, if they had missed, or if like Justin hadn't been able to go because of his hand, like he played through his clubbed hand thing, that could have like caused issues. There weren't a lot of guys in there, at least guys who we knew the team would feel comfortable with playing extended periods of time, right? And so I think he was a good addition, but I would agree that it's a hold. We don't know if he'll end up getting playing time now with all the 2024 editions we aren't even going to talk about. But yeah, that the secondary is in like a complete reverse of where it was last fall. And so that makes talking about these guys like, I've said interesting so many times in the past 2 podcasts, but interesting because they, like, when they were brought in last year, the year before that, like, it made sense and they were really good additions, but now they're probably not going to get the time to grow into starters that they maybe could have been if the overhaul hadn't happened. And if
Braden Davis is next on the list here, comes in as a quarterback from South Carolina. And I think we're going to have to put a stock down on Braden at this point. As a quarterback, they did switch him over to wide receiver towards the end of spring ball. At least we saw him taking some reps at wide receiver, and I think he is going to be moved to that position permanently. You know, look, this was a different coaching staff, but Babers did not trust him to throw the ball down the stretch with Garrett hurt last year, with Carlos Del Rio Wilson hurt last year. They went to that gadget offense with Dan Villari and Quinn Allen, which has been well documented at this point. Davis is just, look, and he's a younger player trying to work his way up. He transferred here as a freshman, but he also has not grabbed hold of that backup quarterback position, and a new coaching staff comes in. We're seeing him at wide receiver towards the end of camp, so could be stock up at receiver if he can make that transition, but certainly as a quarterback, we're at stock down territory.
Yeah, it's tough. And, you know, it did seem at times like he was really competing with Carlos, and then at others, like, there wasn't much. That backup room has just been kind of just a tough watch the past 2 years, just because it's just kind of like you can like sense like a, not frustration, but like you just knew that like they didn't feel confident enough in either of those guys to do a lot. And that's like tough for a team. Like, and so I would agree. I think we will probably see it be a formal position switch once the roster comes out in the next month or so. And yeah, maybe he'll prove himself there, or maybe he will be a guy that we're talking about transferring again next spring.
And it's the hardest position to find in the portal, backup quarterback, right? Like, who do you going to bring in? It's like, yep, I'm number 2. Let's go. No, if you go into the portal, it is with the thought that you're at least going to compete for the starting job. And it's just been a tricky thing that Syracuse has not been able to land on. We mentioned Carlos Del Rio Wilson in the last pod. Jakari Williams comes in the fall, but he's a freshman, and it's going to, take him time to get into the mix here. There's a couple other quarterbacks that Syracuse brought in, but I don't think any of them are serious to contend for the starter position once Kyle McCord goes, or even for the backup at this point. So the most important position on the field remains somewhat of a work in progress at Syracuse, which is interesting. Jayden Bellamy is next year, Emily. He comes to Syracuse, from Notre Dame. Kind of reminds me of Elijah Clark, right? Came in with expectations. You knew what kind of talented player he was. Just wanted to get on the field more. He just couldn't get on a very talented lineup at Notre Dame as much as he wanted to. And has 29 tackles and worked his way into being a starting cornerback a year ago. He is a starting quarterback now, at least going into fall camp. Stock firmly up on this guy.
Yeah, definitely. He's a stock up guy, you know. I've been intrigued by him since he transferred in. Again, like you said, like he's coming from a program like Notre Dame, which Notre Dame has been pretty darn good the past few seasons, and he just wasn't getting the playing time there that he wanted. He comes in as the anchor to this cornerback group specifically this fall. Obviously, we're looking at potentially Marcellus Barnes Jr. in at the opposite side of him, or Devin Grant is looking like probably the more likely one there. And so, I mean, stock up, and he's got stock up, but he's also got like he has to be consistent this year, and he has to keep that level and show that he can be the type of leader that they had in Isaiah Johnson last year and Garrett Williams before that. And he's kind of got that lineage going on of he's going to be an older veteran cornerback who's across from someone who's new to the team, maybe even a true freshman. And that's an interesting dynamic to have.
Bellamy was one of those guys in talking to in spring ball that he had been here for a year, got his feet on the ground, but also involved in a transition, but sounded like a leader, sounded like he knew what he was doing, and somebody that they kind of turned to in spring ball to show the way for some of the younger players at that position. Joe Moore, 6'5", 306, offensive tackle, who transferred once and has transferred again. Moore ends up in Arkansas in the portal, which brings us to the last two guys on the list here for 2023. Jayden Gould, who is another transfer that came in from Nebraska. Syracuse had a few of those, right? And it's interesting because how that's starting to go the other way with a couple players with Tony White now being out there at Nebraska, but played 14 games, 19 tackles, interception, and is in the mix with this transition now, Emily, to the 4-2-5. He's going to be in that star position role along with Justin Barron, it seems. So stock up on him.
Yeah, I don't know that I would go stock up quite yet. I think he's like on his way there, and he'll raise it this fall, but just based off what we've seen, I don't know that he's quite there yet. He did get a shout out from Justin in the spring when they were both kind of learning what's not entirely a new position, as Justin's explained. It's very similar to what he was playing in the past. It just has a slightly different name, and he's a little bit more downfield more often. He's a bit anchored towards the line in a way that he hasn't been. But, you know, Gould was also, even though they're coming from different schools, also a little bit of a package deal with Bellamy. They're kind of friends, and their dads knew each other and stuff. And so they've kind of been paired together. And he hasn't had the moment to take off quite like Bellamy yet, I think. But I think he'll get there this season. And so a hold leaning towards a stock up for me.
And the last guy on our list here is Braylen Ingraham, who is a defensive tackle who comes in from a little school called Alabama. He's up to 6'4", 301, came in at about 290 for Syracuse. And like a lot of guys, has put on anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds of weight under the new nutrition and muscle building systems that they put in at Syracuse under a new strength and conditioning staff. Now, Emily, I'm tempted to say stock up because he's on the 2 deep. He's more than likely going to make an impact on that defensive line, but I just haven't seen it. He just hasn't played enough. We've talked to him. He's looked good in practice. I mean, if you really push me up against a wall, I'd probably say stock up. I want to buy stock in this kid. But I'm probably going to say hold at this point. I just don't want to get stars in my eyes because he came here from Alabama, right? He's got the physical build. I haven't seen anything to detract from what I think he could do here. I just want to see it first. I just want to see it before I'm like, all right, I'm in on this guy. But I have a feeling, probably midway through next season, I'll be like, what the heck was I thinking? I should have bought stock on that guy. Would have been worth a lot more now.
Yeah, I'm going to go stock up because of this. He was medically retired at Alabama ahead of the 2022 season. He torn his ACL, torn his lateral meniscus that previous spring, 2021. Played through 2021 season, or no. He didn't play that season, but he came back in the spring and went through spring ball with Alabama in 2022, but then medically retired after that, took the 22 season off, and then committed to SU in December of the 2022 year. So they're getting a guy who hadn't played football in a year, who had 2 major injuries that forced him to medically retire at one of the most prestigious college football programs in the country, albeit. And so to have that guy come in and have him be more than just a depth player and have him be someone who's actually on the depth chart, actually making plays, even if there's still not anything like crazy he's contributed yet, like I'd say that's a stock up situation, because they very easily could have taken him and it could have been like, oh no, like why did we take a guy who was medically retired? Like this, he's not fit to be on the field anymore, yada, yada, yada. And instead, he has been on the field, and I think he will be again this fall.
What an exercise this was, going back to 2020 and some players that are still on this roster and ready to kind of cap their Syracuse careers this year. And Emily, what I was really struck by in doing this was not only the usual, like, oh, wait, that we had 2 players that we went over that were the top rated guys on the list that are no longer here, and players that were unrated that are now contributors, players that were highly rated that, either transferred out or just didn't live up to their billing. But in 4 short years, and looking back at these classes, how the number of transfers grew. We were just talking about one there in Ingraham, of course, how important they became. And really in the last couple of years of the Dino Babers era, how much the transfer portals outweighed the recruits that he brought in, with a couple of noted exceptions here. Fran, as we speak, is at 24 commitments for the class of 2025, but certainly the transfers have made a huge impact, Kyle McCord and Fidel Diggs notably. So he's not ignoring the portal. He was aggressive in the portal, but he's doing it old school as well, Emily, with 24 commits. That's the second most in the country as we speak, behind Rutgers, which creates a whole other conversation, by the way, because the Battle of New Jersey is going on here between Syracuse and Rutgers once again. So I guess recruiting is still important. The portal, though, if you're looking for guys that are going to come in, instant impact, and turn your fortunes around quickly, you're going to lean a lot more there than in recruiting. But Fran still believes in recruiting because there's a heck of a lot of guys in the class of 2025.
I think the important thing to remember there is that this is going to be we can count the 2024 class as his first class, but this is his first real class. And it's much easier to build your program the way you want it to be and build a culture when you are bringing in guys from the get-go who understand your culture. And so I think that is why there is a heavy lean towards the high school recruits. Now, we have heard him say he values high school recruiting, and he's certainly one of those guys, but I don't think it's always going to be this skewed in that direction. I think that is a very pointed thing this year of you're bringing in guys, some of whom are very good, yes, others who are just kind of replacements for lower level guys that Dino had brought in. I mean, look at how many guys in this 2023 class left. We're just swapping guys in for those guys who are bought into Fran instead of having bought into Dino and now are having to transition to Fran. If that makes sense. The high number of high school recruits, I do think, is impacted to a certain degree by the fact that this is his first recruiting class, and that he's a new coach taking over a new program, leading a program for the first time.
And we didn't do an overview of 2025 yet, because why would we do that? Because it's so into the future. But a few notes on that. 17 of 24, if I'm not mistaken, it's right around there, are from the Northeast. So you stayed in that 6-hour window and brought in not only a lot of guys from Jersey, but Northeastern players. There's a real emphasis on size in that class. There's a real emphasis on speed in that class as well. There's a player they just took recently, an offensive lineman, who's only played 1 year of college football, or 1 year of high school football, but you see 6'7" there. So you take a chance on a guy like that. So it's been intriguing for sure. It seems like every other day we're getting commits, and this guy's committing. This pod comes out later in the week. As we're recording this, it's Tuesday, but you've got a quarterback in Malik Washington who's committing on Friday. And it just, the expression, Emily, recruiting never stops, has really been emphasized in the Fran Brown era here with how aggressive he's been. The players that are putting Syracuse on their top 4 lists, their top 5 lists that maybe weren't in the past in terms of the level of schools that Syracuse is in the company with. And it has been intriguing, to say the least. There was a flurry to start, but it hasn't really stopped in terms of recruiting, because we hear and talk about this pretty much every day.
Yeah, it is an ongoing thing. As we've said before on this pod, there is no off season. I just call it the irregular season.
We're firmly into it, as we're still at the end of June, into July, and before you know it, training camp will be underway, friends. This was fun. I appreciate your patience in doing this, Emily, and looking back at all the research, and we're like, who's this guy? Is he still on the roster? What happened to this guy? And like, we're doing deep dives on names we haven't heard in 3 years, but it was a lot of fun, and we appreciate our Syracuse Sports Insiders as well for being a part of this. Your suggestions, your feedback, your opinions, always welcome, of course, and what you want us to talk about on the podcast. And we thank our Syracuse Sports Insiders for being a part of this thing. If you are not a Syracuse Sports Insider, come on board. Jump in the pool. Just send a text to 315-847-3895. Text the word orange to that number, and you get a 2-week free trial to become a Syracuse Sports Insider. Just $3.99 a month. After that, you get direct text from me. You get breaking news from me first, opinions from me first, anything that we're doing on the podcast. We keep you guys in the loop because we want your feedback on that. A lot of great ideas have come from our Syracuse Sports Insiders of some podcasts we're going to be doing in the near future and the future. Exciting things happening in terms of, we're planning some live podcasts and a lot of fun things on the way. So being a Syracuse Sports Insider keeps you all up to date on that and more. So we hope you can join today. For Emily Leiker, I'm Brent Axe. Thanks for listening to our series of re-ranking Syracuse football recruiting and transfer classes. We'll talk to you next time here on Syracuse Sports.